just love their children every now and then.
They call him the king of country music, a man who sold over 120 million records with 60 number-one hits, more than anyone else in the genre's history. To the world, George Strait is unshakable. A cowboy hat, a quiet smile, and a voice that carried America through heartbreaks and weddings alike. But behind the stillness, behind the myth of perfection, lies a silence so heavy that it shaped every note he ever sang. In 1986, just as his career was exploding, George's 13-year-old daughter Jennifer died in a sudden car accident. From that day forward, he refused interviews, avoided tabloids, and locked his grief away from the world. He never spoke about it publicly, not once. Yet when he sang songs like Baby Blue or You'll Be There, audiences felt something deeper than music. They felt the silent cry of a father who had lost everything. Now, at 73, fans look back and wonder, how did a man who almost never spoke become the most enduring voice of country music? How did someone who hid his deepest tragedy turn that silence into a legacy larger than life? The truth is darker, more heartbreaking, and more human than anyone ever imagined. Because the story of George Strait isn't just about success, fame, or records. It's about how one man turned unbearable loss into timeless art. And the truth behind his silence is much darker. Before the world called him the king of country music, George Harvey Strait was just a quiet boy growing up in the dusty stretches of South Texas. Born on May 18, 1952, in the small town of Poteet, George's childhood wasn't filled with music or glamour. Instead, it was shaped by silence, hard work, and loss. When George was only 9, his mother left the family home, taking his sister with her and leaving George and his brother to be raised by their father, John Strait, a math teacher and rancher. On the sprawling land in Pearsall, Texas, George learned early that life didn't offer comfort. His father taught him discipline, duty, and the weight of responsibility. But what was missing was just as important: affection, encouragement, and space to dream. There were no pianos in the living room, no music lessons, no ambitions of fame. The soundtrack of George's youth was the steady creak of ranch gates, the sweat of long summer days, and the endless Texas wind. He learned to keep his feelings inside, because in that house, silence was survival. And yet, music found its way to him. On summer nights at county fairs, George would watch traveling bands play guitars under the hot Texas sky. Those songs about heartbreak, hope, and the land itself planted something inside him. At first, he was drawn to rock and roll, idolizing the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. He even joined a garage band in high school called the Stoics. But while rock burned bright and fast, country music simmered quietly in his soul, like embers waiting to ignite. By the time George turned 18, he didn't dream of Nashville. He didn't plan to be famous. He only knew how to work hard, keep his word, and stay true. But destiny had other plans. Soon, love, marriage, and even the U.S. Army would put him in front of a microphone for the first time and awaken the voice that would one day silence entire stadiums. In 1971, at just 19 years old, George Strait made two choices that would change his life forever. He eloped with his high school sweetheart, Norma Voss, crossing the border into Mexico for a quiet wedding. That same year, he enlisted in the U.S. Army. Stationed in Hawaii, George's life was supposed to be about discipline, rifles, and routine. Yet fate quietly placed him in front of a microphone. On base, George joined a military-sponsored band called Ramblin' Country. For the first time, he sang country songs to soldiers yearning for home. His voice was untrained but undeniable, filled with a warmth and grit that struck a chord. In the middle of drills, uniforms, and the shadow of war, a country singer was quietly being born. When he returned to Texas in 1975, George enrolled at Southwest Texas State University, studying agriculture by day and playing music by night. He joined a local group that would become the Ace in the Hole Band. They played in honky-tonks, smoky bars, and small-town dance halls. The crowds were often drunk, the pay was barely enough for gas, but George never complained. He wasn't chasing stardom, he was following something deeper, something unspoken that music gave him. But the road was brutal. Nashville rejected him again and again, saying his sound was too traditional and not commercial enough. By 1980, George was ready to quit. He accepted a stable job designing cattle pens, tired of chasing a dream that seemed out of reach. But then came Norma's quiet push. "If you quit now," she told him, "you'll regret it for the rest of your life." That one sentence pulled him back from the edge. In 1981, fate finally delivered. George recorded Unwound, and to everyone's surprise, the song shot into the Billboard Top 10. Suddenly, the same Nashville that had slammed its doors was listening. His debut album, Strait, signaled the arrival of a new kind of star, one who didn't wear glitter, didn't chase publicity, and didn't need theatrics. George Strait became the voice of honesty, grit, and Texas soul. It was the beginning of a career that would redefine country music itself. By the mid-1980s, George Strait was no longer just a rising star. He was already shaping the future of country music. Hits like Amarillo by Morning and The Chair had made him a household name. To the outside world, George looked untouchable, a man without scandal, without weakness, a cowboy who seemed immune to the chaos of fame. But then came June 25, 1986, the day everything changed. That morning, a car carrying George's only daughter, Jennifer Strait, lost control on a Texas road. Jennifer, just 13 years old, wasn't wearing a seatbelt. She was thrown from the car and killed instantly. When the call reached George, who was preparing for a show in Dallas, his world collapsed in silence. There were no public breakdowns, no televised tears, no emotional interviews. George simply withdrew. From that day on, he stopped giving personal interviews. He refused to speak about the tragedy. Instead, he buried his grief deep inside and let his music carry what words could not. Songs like Baby Blue and You'll Be There became more than ballads. They were private letters from a father to a daughter, sung in front of millions who never truly knew what each lyric meant. Fans heard tenderness in his voice, but they didn't see the weight he carried backstage. George's silence wasn't just stubbornness, it was survival. If he let the world in, he feared the pain would consume him. And so, while tabloids searched for cracks, George gave them nothing. No scandals, no confessions, only music. Behind the crown of King George was a man shattered by loss, carrying a scar that would never fully heal. The cowboy who never spoke became the father who could only sing. After Jennifer's death, George Strait's career didn't stop, but something inside him changed forever. He no longer chased the spotlight. He no longer entertained interviews or fame. Instead, he retreated into music, using his songs as the only outlet for a grief too deep to speak aloud. Each performance became a balancing act between legend and broken father. When George sang Baby Blue, fans thought it was just another ballad, but for George, it was Jennifer's song. Every note a quiet prayer, every line a reminder of the daughter he could never hold again. Audiences cried without knowing why. They felt the weight in his voice, the silence between his words, the ache that he refused to explain. Unlike many stars who turn to alcohol, scandals, or tabloids to cope with tragedy, George chose invisibility. Offstage, he lived simply, a rancher in Texas, a husband to Norma, a father to his son Bubba. But the silence around Jennifer never lifted. He never spoke her name in interviews. He never wrote her directly into a lyric, as if to say her memory was too sacred, too painful to share with the world. And yet, every time he walked on stage, tens of thousands of people could feel her absence, hanging there in the pauses, in the tenderness of his voice, in the way he sang about love and loss as if he'd lived it deeper than anyone else. George Strait didn't just lose his daughter. He lost the version of himself that might have been open, lighthearted, or carefree. From 1986 onward, the cowboy hat, the quiet smile, and the steady voice became a shield, a way to carry unbearable sorrow without ever letting it break him in public. It was his greatest tragedy, but also the reason his music still moves millions. Because when George Strait sang, he wasn't just singing country songs. He was teaching the world how to survive heartbreak in silence. Today, at 73, George Strait stands as a living paradox. He is one of the most successful artists in music history. 60 #1 hits, over 120 million albums sold, and a record-breaking farewell concert that drew more than 100,000 fans. And yet he remains one of the most private men in country music. No scandals, no tabloid dramas, no confessions on talk shows. Just the music and the silence that made it timeless. What makes George Strait's legacy so powerful isn't just his achievements, it's how he carried unimaginable loss with dignity. Instead of turning grief into spectacle, he turned it into melody. Instead of chasing headlines, he let his voice tell the story. Fans didn't just hear his songs, they felt them, because behind every lyric was a man who had lived love, heartbreak, and tragedy more deeply than he ever let on. His marriage to Norma, lasting more than 50 years, remains one of the quietest and strongest unions in the entertainment world. His son, Bubba, writes songs with him, carrying the Strait name into another generation. And through it all, George continues to sing, reminding the world that country music isn't about fame, it's about truth. In the end, George Strait never needed to shout his pain to be understood. He let silence do the talking. And somehow, that silence spoke louder than words ever could. Maybe that's why he isn't just the king of country. He is the cowboy who proved that the deepest scars can create the most lasting songs.